Welcome back. This is where we talk about the dark corners of Skyrim that most prefer not to examine too closely. Today's confession explores the most terrifying what if in Skyrim's history. What if Ysgramor never made it out of Saarthal alive? The entire Nordic civilization, every hold, every legend, every warrior who shaped Tamriel's history depends on one man surviving one night. Remove him from the timeline and watch everything you know dissolve into a completely different world. The Falmer would have thrived while humanity's foothold in the north withered to nothing. No companions, no Thu'um in human throats, no Nordic empire, just absence where a culture should have been, and the disturbing revelation that destiny is far more fragile than we pretend. This story follows one witness who sees both timelines simultaneously, standing between what happened and what could have happened, watching as an entire civilization hangs on the edge of a knife. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. Now, let me tell you about the world where Ysgramor died too soon and Nordic civilization never began. I need you to hear this before memory fails or madness takes what clarity remains. My name does not matter anymore, because I am speaking from a place that should not exist, witnessing events that never occurred, standing on shores where no human footsteps ever echoed. I am telling you about the world that was erased when one man died too soon, when Ysgramor fell with his family in Saarthal's flames, and no survivor carried the tale back across the sea of ghosts. You know the stories. Every Nord child learns them. Ysgramor the Returned, the 500 Companions, the conquest of Skyrim, the birth of our people. You recite those names on the 13th of Sun's dawn. You speak of Jorrvaskr like it always stood in Whiterun, of the Companions like they were inevitable, of the Thu'um like it belonged to human throats from the beginning of time. But I have seen the other path, the one where the Night of Tears succeeded completely, where every Atmoran in Saarthal burned or bled, where no ship sailed home with warnings, where Atmora never knew to sing songs of vengeance. Let me paint this for you properly. Saarthal stands in the snow, the first great city of men in Tamriel. Ysgramor has gathered his people there, refugees from Atmora's civil wars, seeking peace in a frozen land the elves called Merith. For years, they build, stone by stone, generation by generation. The Falmer watch them breed and multiply, these loud, crude humans who multiply like rabbits, who dig where they should not dig, who uncover things beneath the earth that were meant to stay buried. The eye of Magnus pulses in the darkness under the city. The elves know it is there now. They want it. They fear what humans might do with such power. The Night of Tears arrives like prophecy. Falmer, warriors pour through Saarthal's gates with steel and magic that sings in the frozen air. They move with purpose, with coordination, with the absolute certainty of their superiority. The humans fight back with desperation, with crude weapons, with the knowledge that mercy will not be offered. Fire consumes wooden structures, ice spells shatter bone. The screaming goes on for hours, then days. In the history you know, Ysgramor escapes with his sons Ingol and Ylgar. They take the last longboat. They sail home to Atmora. They tell tales of elven treachery that light fires in Atmoran hearts and birth the 500 companions who return to make Skyrim bleed elven blood for generations. But that is not what happens in the world I am showing you. In this timeline, there are no survivors. Ysgramor dies defending his family. His sons die beside him. The last longboat burns in the harbor. Every human in Saarthal becomes ash or frozen meat left for the wolves. The Falmer complete their cleansing efficiently, professionally, without the dramatic failure that usually haunts their history. They reclaim the Eye of Magnus. They bury it deeper this time, seal it better, hide it from future generations who might covet its power. Saarthal becomes ruins overnight, a cautionary tale the elves tell each other about what happens when you allow lesser races to build cities near your borders. No one returns to Atmora with news because there is no one left to return. The civil war in that frozen continent grinds on without the interruption of southern tales. Years pass. Atmoran families wonder why their cousins across the sea have stopped sending messages. Some speculate disease, others guess harsh winters or famine. No one imagines the truth because no witness survived to speak it. Eventually, Atmora's people stop thinking about Mareth entirely. Why sail south to uncertainty when the homeland offers enough blood and struggle to occupy every warrior's lifetime? The migration stops. That massive wave of humanity that should have crashed against Tamriel's northern shores never arrives. Atmora continues its slow freeze into permanent winter, but now all its people die there instead of escaping south. By the time the First Era begins, Atmora is the frozen tomb you know from late in history, but thousands of years too early. Ships full of corpses never beg to make port in 1E68 because those people are already dead, frozen in Atmora's embrace, never having attempted the crossing that might have saved them. Without Ysgramor's return, Skyrim remains Mareth. The Falmer civilization continues uninterrupted, unchallenged by the human tide that should have drowned it. Their snow crystal cities gleam under the aurora. Their culture flourishes. They worship Ori-El in grand chantries that never burn. They master magics that in your timeline were lost when they fled underground. The statue at the Skyforge gathers dust, feared and avoided by Falmer who remember it, predates even their habitation of the land, who whisper that it was made by gods or devils in ages before history began. The companions never form because Ysgramor never raises the 500. Jorrvaskr never becomes legend, because Jeek of the River never sails his ship to Whiterun's plains, never builds a mead hall from its hull, never finds the Skyforge, and claims it for human hands. Whiterun does not exist. The plains remain empty, avoided by Falmer, who sensed something ancient and dangerous sleeping beneath that eagle-shaped stone. Without Nordic settlement, without human axes felling trees and human hands shaping stone, the geography of Skyrim remains wild, untamed, belonging entirely to elven civilizations that see no reason to change what works. Windhelm is never built by Falmer slaves, working under Nordic whips because there are no Nords to enslave them. The holds do not exist. The Jarls are never crowned. The whole political structure of Skyrim that you know, that feels ancient and inevitable, was always contingent on one man's escape from one burning city. Take that away, and the entire map rewrites itself. But the changes run deeper than geography. Consider the Thu'um. In your world, during the Dragon War, Paarthurnax taught humans to use the dragon language as a weapon against their draconic oppressors. He showed them how to channel life essence into shouts that could match dragon roars. Without a human population in Skyrim to teach, that gift never passes to mortal throats. The Thu'um remains exclusively draconic. The ancient heroes never learn Dragon Rend. The Dragon War ends differently, or never ends at all, because humans lack the one weapon that might have turned the tide. Think about what that means. The Way of the Voice is never established because Jurgen Windcaller never exists to found it. High Hrothgar remains an empty peak, just rock and snow and wind, never sanctified by Greybeard meditation. The Dragonborn prophecy warps beyond recognition because it was always tied to Nordic culture, to Nordic religion, to the idea that Kind's chosen would rise among her children to save the world from dragonfire. But Kind's children in Skyrim are dead, all of them, in Saarthal's ashes. The Falmer thrive for centuries longer than they should. They expand their territory, they refine their architecture. Their temples to Ori-El become wonders that rival Somerset's greatest achievements. But they are not safe. The Dwemer still inhabit Blackreach, and the deep places. The tension between the two elven civilizations continues, philosophical and territorial disputes, simmering toward inevitable conflict. But without the pressure of Nordic expansion from above, without being driven into Dwemer arms as desperate refugees, the relationship between Snow Elves and Deep Elves remains coldly distant rather than patron and slave. When the Dwemer vanish in 1E700, it happens the same way because that was their own folly, tied to the heart of Lorkhan and Kagranak's mad ambition. But the aftermath looks nothing like what you know. There are no twisted Falmer emerging from Blackreach, because no Falmer were ever blinded and enslaved down there. Instead, the Snow Elves inherit the empty Dwemer cities. They explore Blackreach with wonder and horror. They claim the ruins. They study the strange machines. They become the keepers of Dwemer's secrets. But they remain surface dwellers at heart. They do not degenerate into the blind, savage things you fight in ruins. They remain the proud civilization they always were, shaped by different pressures now, inheriting both their own culture and scavenging what they can understand from Dwemer remains. Skyrim becomes something unique, a Falmer kingdom built on two elven legacies, neither human nor properly Aldmeri, isolated in the frozen north. And to the south, where Morrowind rises, the Chimer and later the Dunmer find themselves with northern borders that extend farther than in your timeline. Without Nordic resistance, without human kingdoms to contest every frozen pass and mountain valley, the Dark Elves expand into what you call Eastmarch. They claim the hot springs. They build settlements in geothermal valleys. The whole balance of power in northern Tamriel shifts toward elven dominance because the human element that should have contested every inch never materialized. But here is where it gets strange, where my mind struggles to hold all the threads. Without Ysgramor's migration, without the human population that grew from those Atmoran seeds, who are the Nords, the answer is simple and terrible. They do not exist, not as you know them. The Nordic peoples, those proto-humans already scattered across Tamriel, develop differently. The Atmoran influence never shapes them into the Nords you recognize. The language, the culture, the warrior traditions, the mead halls, the concepts of honor that define Nord identity, all of it remains unborn. The consequences spiral outward like cracks in ice. Tiber Septim is never born, or is born as someone fundamentally different because his claimed Atmoran heritage never happened. The entire Third Empire might not form or forms under different leadership, shaped by different cultural values, expanding from different starting points. The religious landscape shifts because the Nordic pantheon never crystallizes into the form you know. Kine remains an obscure wind goddess rather than the mother of men. Shor is forgotten or remembers only by elven scholars as an aspect of Lorcan they do not worship. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I would like to know if I am the only one who feels this way, if I am the only one who sees how easily everything we are could have been erased by one man's death, one night's complete success, one failure to escape across dark water. I need to stop here. My hands shake. The cold presses in. I am standing on Atmora's coast, where no one stands anymore, looking at the sea of ghosts that Ysgramor never crossed for a second time. Behind me, frozen corpses remain in their ancient poses. Civil War casualties turn to ice sculptures in a land that died too soon. Before me, the water stretches toward a Skyrim that never became Skyrim, and I know I am running out of time to tell you the rest of this. There is so much more, the full weight of what was lost, what was gained, what replaced the world you think is inevitable. But the vision fragments, the cold bites deeper. The voices of people who never existed call to me from the not history where they should have lived. I will continue. Say you want to hear more, and I will continue. The vision stabilizes again. I can see more clearly now. Let me show you what fills the void where Nordic culture should have bloomed. The Nordic peoples remain scattered across Tamriel, never unified by Atmoran conquest and culture. In High Rock, they continue mixing with the Aldmer, creating the Bretons just as in your timeline, but the process looks different without Nordic raiders pushing south from Skyrim to complicate the bloodlines. In Cyrodiil, the Netties remain enslaved by Ayleids longer, perhaps centuries longer, because Pelennor Whitestrake's connection to Nordic culture and possibly to Ysgramor's line never manifests the same way. The slave Queen Alessia still rises eventually, but the rebellion takes a different shape, draws on different cultural wells, builds something other than what became the First Empire. Skyrim itself, this land of dragons and snow, becomes the last major Falmer stronghold in all of Tamriel. Everywhere else, Elven civilizations decline or transform. Somerset remains Altmer perfection. Valenwood keeps its Bosmer. Morrowind sees the Chimer become Dunmer, but Skyrim, isolated in the north, frozen and harsh, becomes the place where Snow Elf culture reaches its apex rather than its nadir. They adapt, they thrive, they become something magnificent and strange. The Falmer cities in this timeline rival anything built by other elven races. Their architecture combines ice and stone in ways that seem impossible. Structures that channel the aurora's light through crystal channels, buildings that sing when the wind passes through carved openings. They have had centuries, millennia even, to perfect their craft without the pressure of Nordic extermination driving them underground. The Chantry of Oriel is not some lonely outpost forgotten in distant valleys. It becomes the heart of their civilization, a grand cathedral city where thousands worship, where their culture's greatest achievements gather. Knight Paladin Gelibor does not stand alone as the last uncorrupted snow elf hiding in ruins. In this world, he commands armies. He is one voice among many in a thriving culture. His brother Virthur never becomes a vampire, nursing ancient grudges, because the desperation and isolation that drove him to darkness never occurs. They are priests in a functioning religion, not relics clinging to dead glory. But the Falmer are not peaceful. They remember Saarthal, not as a shameful genocide, but as a successful defense of their homeland against foreign invaders. They celebrate it in songs and ceremonies. They teach their children that vigilance against human expansion saved their civilization, and they remain vigilant, watching the southern borders, monitoring the scattered human populations that exist in other provinces, prepared to respond with overwhelming force if humans ever threaten northern Tamriel again. This makes them different from other elven cultures. The Altmer look down on other races with aristocratic disdain. The Bosmer coexist through strange compacts with nature. The Dunmer build their society on ancient grudges and house politics. But the Falmer in this timeline define themselves through military readiness, through the memory of nearly being displaced by human colonizers, through the determination that it will never happen again. They become warrior scholars, every citizen trained in combat and magic, their society organized around the principle of collective defense. When the dragons return, as dragons always do in Elder Scrolls timelines, the dragon crisis hits Falmer Skyrim instead of Nordic Skyrim. The shape of that conflict becomes entirely different. The Falmer have powerful mages, sophisticated enchantments, coordinated military responses that Nords in your timeline could never match. They do not rely on one prophesied Dragonborn to save them. They fight as a unified civilization with centuries of magical innovation behind them. But here is what troubles me most, what keeps me awake in this frozen nowhere between timelines. The Dragonborn prophecy itself warps into something unrecognizable. That destiny was always tied to Nordic culture, to the idea that someone with dragon blood would arise among kind's chosen people to face Alduin World Eater when he returned from time. Without Nords, without that specific cultural framework, does the prophecy manifest at all? Or does it attach itself to whoever exists in Skyrim when the time comes? Perhaps the last Dragonborn is born Falmer. Perhaps they speak a different language, worship different gods, fight with elven steel instead of Nordic iron. Or perhaps the prophecy fails entirely, the mechanism that should have produced a hero to face Alduin never activating because the cultural and spiritual foundation it required was destroyed in Saarthal's flames. In which case, when Alduin returns from the time wound, there is no one prophesied to stop him. The world ends differently, or Alduin is defeated through other means, or the conflict drags on for centuries rather than being resolved by one chosen warrior. I try to see that confrontation, the Falmer Dragonborn facing Alduin and the image fractures. It feels wrong, like trying to force puzzle pieces from different boxes to connect. The prophecy resists this alternate reality, suggesting that some destinies are more fragile than they appear, that the grand narratives you trust are contingent on specific conditions being met. Let me bring this back to human terms, to the people who should exist but do not. Every Nord in your timeline traces their ancestry back to Atmaran colonizers or to Nedes who intermarried with them. Ulfric Stormcloak does not exist in the world I am showing you. Neither does General Tullius's opponent, because there is no Stormcloak rebellion without Nords to rebel against imperial control. The entire Fourth Era Civil War, that conflict tearing Skyrim apart when you play the game, never occurs because the cultural tensions that sparked it require Nordic identity to exist. Rike, Galmar, Balgruf, all the Jarls and Thanes and common soldiers, none of them are born because their ancestors were never born. The family lines simply do not begin. The genetic material that should have combined to create those individuals gets scattered across different timelines, different parents, different births, producing entirely different people or no one at all. Think about the College of Winterhold. In your world, it stands as a bastion of magical learning despite Nord distrust of magic. But in a Falmer-dominated Skyrim, there is no College of Winterhold because the Falmer build their magical institutions differently, incorporate them into temples and military training rather than segregating them into separate academies. The geography might still be used, that peninsula jutting into the Sea of Ghosts, but what stands there is something else. A Falmer lighthouse, perhaps, a military outpost, or nothing at all, just wind and stone and crashing waves. The Thieves' Guild does not establish itself in Riften because Riften does not exist as you know it. The city might be there, built by Falmer for Falmer purposes, but the criminal underworld that grew from Nordic culture and Nordic economic systems never develops. The Dark Brotherhood still operates somewhere, probably because that organization predates and transcends specific cultures, but their Skyrim sanctuary is located elsewhere or not at all, their contracts coming from elven nobles instead of human ones. Sovngarde, that Nordic afterlife where warriors feast in Shor's Hall, does not exist because it is a cultural construct born from Nordic beliefs about death and honor. The Falmer dead go elsewhere, to Aetherius perhaps, or to some Snow Elf afterlife tied to Oriel that never made it into human records because humans never learned about it before the Falmer fell. The entire cosmic geography of death shifts when you remove one culture from existence. And the Greybeards, those patient masters of the voice living in isolated meditation on the throat of the world, they are not there. High Hrothgar is an empty mountain. The Pilgrim's Path, those 7,000 steps carved into rock with tablets recounting the way of the voice, was never built. The philosophy Jurgen Windcaller developed after his devastating defeat at Red Mountain never crystallizes because Jurgen Windcaller is never born. The idea that the Thu'um should be used only in times of true need, that it is a gift from Kine, requiring reverent application, dies before it is conceived. If you have ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I will be reading them. If you could prevent this timeline, if you could ensure Ysgramor escapes Saarthal, would you? Or is there something in this Falmer-dominated world worth preserving, worth allowing to exist instead of the one you know? I find myself strangely ambivalent. The Nordic conquest of Skyrim involved genocidal violence against the Falmer. Ysgramor's 500 companions massacred elven populations with systematic thoroughness. They enslaved survivors. They hunted the remnants for sport. The history you celebrate is built on bones and ashes, but without it, humanity's foothold in northern Tamriel vanishes. Entire peoples never come into being. The ethnic and cultural diversity of Tamriel contracts becomes more purely elven, loses the human element that complicated and enriched it. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from Skyrim, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. Because this is a warning, even if I am not sure what I am warning you about anymore, the deeper implications continue to unfold. The Empire looks entirely different without Nordic legions, without Skyrim as a province, without Talos, who claimed Atmoran heritage. The religious conflicts of the Fourth Era, the ban on Talos worship that inflames Nordic nationalism, never happens because Talos is not deified, or is deified differently by different peoples from different starting points. The Aldmeri Dominion's calculations change when they look north and see a Falmer kingdom instead of a fractured Nordic province ripe for manipulation. The Thalmor themselves might find alliance or conflict with the Falmer, two elven civilizations, both ancient and proud, both powerful in magic and war. Do they recognize kinship? Do they clash over philosophy? The Thalmor want to unmake creation and return to divine state. The Falmer, in this timeline, want to preserve their hard-won civilization and prevent human expansion. Those goals might align or might conflict catastrophically, but I realize I am speculating about events centuries, millennia beyond the point of divergence. The initial change, Ysgramor dying in Saarthal, ripples outward with exponentially increasing complexity. By the Fourth Era, by the time of Skyrim's main quest, this alternate timeline is so different from yours that comparison becomes meaningless. It is not your world with small changes. It is a fundamentally different Tamriel that happens to share some geographic and cosmic constants. And yet, underneath all these grand historical shifts, I keep coming back to smaller losses. The individual people who never exist, the warrior who should have been born in Riverwood but now never draws breath, the bard who should have sung in Solitude's tavern but whose song remains forever unsung, the child who should have played in Whiterun's streets but whose laughter never echoes. Billions of potential lives, extinguished before they begin, erased by one man's failure to escape one burning city. You cannot mourn people who were never born. You cannot grieve for civilizations that never formed. But I find myself trying anyway, standing here in the cold between worlds, witnessing the absence of everything familiar, seeing the shape of the void where Nordic culture should have been. The Falmer do not miss what they never lost. They celebrate their uninterrupted history, their continuous civilization, their successful defense against colonization. To them, this is the correct timeline, the good timeline, the one where their people survive and flourish, rather than being driven underground and twisted into monsters. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps this is the better world, but it is not your world. And the question haunting me now, the question I cannot answer, is whether your world deserves to exist more than this one. Whether the accident of Ysgramor's survival, his escape from Saarthal when he should have died, was providence or catastrophe. Whether the entire history of Nordic Skyrim is justified, or whether it is a cosmic mistake written in blood across centuries, the cold deepens. The vision begins to fade, but there is more, one more piece. The final revelation, the part I have been avoiding because it is the most disturbing, the most destabilizing, the truth that makes me question my own existence and sanity. Let me tell you, the ending. Let me show you what becomes of prophecy itself when the people who should fulfill it are erased from history. The final truth is this: I should not exist to tell you this story. That realization came slowly, like frost forming on glass, obscuring the view until nothing clear remains. I have been speaking to you from Atmora's frozen shores, describing a world where Ysgramor died in Saarthal, where Nordic civilization never began, where the Falmer thrive uninterrupted. But I have been avoiding the central question: who am I to witness this? What am I, standing between timelines, seeing both the world that is and the world that almost was? The answer is uncomfortable. I am a ghost of probability, a consciousness that exists in the space between what happened and what could have happened. I remember a world with Nords and companions and the Thu'um echoing from mountains. But I also see this other world, this Falmer-dominated Skyrim, with equal clarity. Both timelines feel real to me, both feel true, and that should be impossible unless I am the prisoner, that walking paradox, that quantum uncertainty made flesh, the one who exists outside normal causality because my choices reshape reality itself, the hero who can save or doom the world because the universe has not decided which timeline I belong to yet. Every Elder Scrolls protagonist carries this weight, this ontological flexibility. We are simultaneously within the story and outside it, able to perceive multiple paths because we walk them all simultaneously until we choose, and I chose wrong, or I chose right, or the choice was made for me by forces beyond comprehension. Alduin's time-wound fractured more than just the Dragon War. It cracked causality itself, let me see backward and sideways into timelines that branch from single moments. Saarthal's burning became one of those moments, a nexus point, a place where history could have gone completely differently. What if Ysgramor died that night? The question propagated backward from the future, seeking answer, and suddenly I could see it. The whole alternate history unfolding from that single change, the Falmer surviving, thriving, becoming something magnificent instead of being driven into degradation. Humanity's foothold in Tamriel shrinking, changing, evolving differently. The map of the world rewriting itself around that absence. But prophecy, real prophecy, is not so easily avoided. The Dragonborn must exist. That is not a suggestion or a possibility. It is a cosmic necessity, written into the bones of creation by Akatosh himself. When Alduin returns, someone must have the dragon blood to face him. The mechanism is built into reality. It will find a way to activate, regardless of the cultural context that should have produced it. So in this Falmer-dominated timeline, the Dragonborn still manifests, but not as you would recognize them, not as a Nord warrior steeped in ancient traditions, taught the way of the voice by graybeards who never existed. Instead, the dragon soul gets poured in whoever happens to be in the right place at the right time when the prophecy demands fulfillment. A Falmer, perhaps, though their culture has no framework for understanding what it means to be Dragonborn, or a Dunmer from the southern borders, suddenly blessed and cursed with power they cannot comprehend because the mythology that should explain it never developed. Imagine that confusion. Imagine absorbing a dragon's soul and having no cultural context for it, no legends to guide you, no graybeards to explain, no ancient Nordic heroes whose example you can follow. Imagine being chosen by destiny, but destiny forgot to provide the instruction manual because the culture that should have preserved it was erased centuries before you were born. That Dragonborn still faces Alduin. They must. Prophecy insists. But the confrontation is messier, more uncertain, less tied to ancient traditions, and more dependent on raw improvisation. They still learn the Thu'um, probably from Paarthurnax, if he still lives on the throat of the world, still brooding over his betrayal of his own kind. But they learn it as a stranger to Skyrim, rather than as a child of its culture. Every shout is alien magic instead of ancestral birthright, and they win, probably. Prophecy has momentum. The world needs Alduin defeated, so he gets defeated. But the story surrounding that victory is entirely different. The songs sung afterward are sung in Falmer or Dunmerry instead of Nordic. The culture that claims the Dragonborn as their hero is not yours. The meaning of the victory shifts. This is what terrifies me most. Not the loss of Nordic culture itself, but the revelation that even cosmic prophecy is contingent, flexible, able to route around damage, to find new channels. The Dragonborn prophecy seemed absolute, seemed to require Nords and Nordic culture, but remove Nords from history and prophecy just shrugs and finds someone else. The universe cares about outcomes, not about the specific people or cultures that produce those outcomes. We are all more replaceable than we realize. Every culture that feels eternal, feels destined, feels chosen by the gods, is actually contingent on 1,000 small accidents that could have gone differently. Ysgramor escaping Saarthal was one such accident. He was wounded, exhausted, watching his city burn and his people die. He could easily have fallen to a Falmer blade. He could have stayed to die fighting instead of fleeing to the ships. He could have been killed by a storm during the crossing back to Atmora. Any of those alternatives would have aborted Nordic civilization before it began, and the world would have continued. Different, but continuing. Prophecies would have found new channels. Heroes would have risen from different peoples. History would have been made by other actors on a different stage. The world does not need Nords specifically. It needed someone to be there when dragons returned. It needed someone to make choices. But who that someone was, what culture they came from, what language they spoke, all negotiable details. This is the true horror I am confessing. Not just that your civilization could have been erased, but that its erasure would barely matter to the cosmic order. The gods would find other worshippers. The prophecies would find other vessels. The great story of Tamriel would continue with different characters. You are not special. None of us are. We are all accidents of history, contingent beings whose existence depends on precise circumstances that could easily have gone differently. The Falmer in the world I have been showing you do not know that they were supposed to become twisted, blind monsters. They do not know they escaped that fate only because Ysgramor died when he should have lived. They experience their history as natural, inevitable, the only way things could have gone, and they are wrong. Their current existence is as contingent as Nordic existence in your timeline. Another small change, another random variable, and they could be gone too, replaced by something else. History is not a straight line leading inevitably to the present. It is a vast branching tree of possibilities, most of which never materialize. We only see the one branch we exist on and mistake it for the trunk. We think our existence is necessary, that we were destined to be here, but step back far enough and you see the truth. We are all living in one random branch among infinite alternatives, and any of them could have been real instead. The Dwemer understood this, I think. That is why they tried to escape causality entirely, to achieve a state beyond contingency. They wanted to stop being subject to the random accidents that shape history, and they vanished from reality, which might have been success or catastrophic failure, depending on what they were actually trying to achieve. I am standing on Atmora's shore, looking at two timelines simultaneously. In one, Ysgramor survives and carries vengeance across the sea. In the other, he dies and the Falmer remains supreme. Both feel equally real to me, because at the quantum level, before observation collapses probability, both are real. I am the observation that has not finished collapsing. I am suspended between states, seeing both, unable to choose which is true, because choosing would mean denying half of what I am. This is what the prisoner experiences. This is what it means to be outside fate. You see all the branches. You remember events that have not happened yet. Remember histories that never occurred. Remember people who were never born. Your mind becomes a battleground where contradictory timelines war for dominance. And you cannot tell anyone because they only experience their single timeline and think you are mad when you describe the others. So, I stand here in the cold, in the space between what was and what could have been, and I tell you about the Skyrim where Ysgramor died. I show you the Falmer civilization that thrived because Nordic conquest never came. I trace the absence of everything familiar, the void where your culture should be, and I ask you to understand that this alternate world is not a fantasy or a thought experiment. It is a real possibility that almost happened, that in some quantum sense did happen, that exists somewhere in the infinite variations of Mundus. Your timeline, the one you think is real and solid, is just as fragile, just as contingent. One different battle, one arrow flying slightly differently, one person choosing left instead of right. And everything changes. The whole structure of civilization rearranges itself around new circumstances. The people you know cease to exist. New people, with different names and faces and stories, take their places, and those new people think their world is inevitable too, never suspecting how easily it could have been otherwise. The College of Winterhold in your timeline teaches that reality is malleable, that magic proves existence is more flexible than common people believe. But they do not understand how right they are. Reality is not just malleable at the edges, through spells and enchantments. It is malleable at the root, at the causal level, at the point where history branches and choices echo forward through centuries. Change one thing in the past, and you change everything in the future. Not just superficial details, but fundamental structures. Not just who is king, but whether kingdoms exist at all. Not just which gods are worshipped, but whether entire religions arise. Not just individual lives, but whether entire peoples come into being. I am running out of time. The vision is collapsing. The cold is absolute now. I can feel myself being pulled back into single timeline, forced to choose one reality and abandon the other. The quantum superposition cannot hold forever. Observation must eventually occur. The wave function must collapse. But before it does, I want you to remember this. I want you to carry this knowledge. Your existence is contingent. Your culture is fragile. Everything you think is permanent and destined is actually balanced on knife's edge, sustained by 10,000 accidents that happen to go right. And in another universe, in another branch of possibility, they went wrong instead. And that universe does not mourn you because it does not know you should exist. The Falmer of that other Skyrim do not remember the Night of Tears as a tragedy, but as a victory. They celebrate their survival. They sing songs of successful defense. They teach their children that vigilance saved civilization. And they are right from their perspective. They cannot mourn a future that never happened, a conquest that never came, a genocide they never experienced. Just as you cannot mourn the Falmer civilization you destroyed, because from your perspective, it was necessary. Ysgramor had to return. The 500 had to take vengeance. Skyrim had to become Nordic. It feels inevitable to you. But I have seen the other side. I have seen it was not inevitable at all. This is my confession then. I am the one who sees both. I am the one cursed to understand that nothing is certain, that all of history balances on moments so small that no one notices them until it is too late. I am the one who watches Ysgramor die in Saarthal and watches him escape and cannot reconcile the two visions into one coherent truth. And now I give this burden to you. Now you know that your world is one possibility among many, that the culture you love, the history you celebrate, the ancestors you honor, all exist because of accidents that could have gone differently. And somewhere, in some other branch of the infinite, they did go differently. And that world is just as real as yours. The cold takes me now, at Mora's final freeze. The collapse into single timeline. I am being pulled back into the world where Ysgramor survived, where Nordic civilization rose, where you exist to hear this. But I will carry the memory of the other world with me, the Falmer-dominated Skyrim that almost was, the absence where your culture should be. And I will wonder, always, which timeline is real, or if both are, or if neither are, or if reality itself is just a story we tell about accidents we mistake for destiny. The snow covers everything now. The cold is absolute. The vision ends. I stood on Atmora's frozen shores and watched ships that never sailed. I witnessed the absence of conquest, the survival of the Falmer, the erasure of Nordic civilization from history. And I understood that this could have been your world, instead of the one you inhabit. One man's death, that was all it would have taken. One man dying when he should have lived, and everything you know would have never existed. Remember that. Remember how fragile destiny is. Remember that you are an accident that happened to occur, living in a timeline that happened to manifest, experiencing a history that could so easily have gone another way, and be grateful or be horrified. I can no longer tell which response is appropriate. The confession ends here. The witness falls silent. The cold claims all.